The following is a paid program by the Whitley Law Firm. Welcome to Attorneys on Call, the program that gives you free legal information from the Whitley Law Firm. Now, here's your host, Drew Smith.
And thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Attorneys on Call. We think we've got a very special program for you today over the next 30 minutes, which is all about you and providing you with great legal information, and it's all free. At any time, you can call the 800 number on your screen, or you can go to whitleylawfirm.com, which is a great first step to find out your questions get answered. Now, think about this for a minute. A lot of us have to go to the hospital. Maybe it's not an emergency, maybe it's a planned procedure, or it could be a spouse or a loved one that has to go to the hospital. Your expectations are that everything's going to be good. You're going to go through the procedure, you're going to be in the hospital, it's going to be fine, you're going to come home. That does not always happen. There are times where things happen inside the hospital that are not your fault and not the fault of your doctor. That's our discussion today with Stacy Miller from the Miller Law Group and Ben Whitley from the Whitley Law Firm. Guys, it's great to be with you today.
Honored to be here, Drew.
Good to be here, Drew.
Ben, we hear the term medical malpractice quite a bit,
Right.
but can you explain to us a little bit about medical malpractice and some of the new data and the new information that has been released recently that's kind of alarming?
It is, Drew, and it was based on a recent study in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was really alarming, some of the statistics. And they got these statistics from 2018, so we really don't know what's happened since the pandemic. Some experts have actually said these could be potentially worse. But the one that really stands out to me, Drew, was the one in four person that goes into the hospital is going to experience an adverse event, a negative event.
That's a high percentage.
That is. What's worse is out of those adverse events, a third of them are serious, which would require, further additional health care or could result in death. So very alarming statistics out of the hospital. And we've, Stacy and I have been talking about this, what's causing this, what's happening. And what we've seen is so much of corporatization coming into the healthcare practices and putting profits over people, this thing that we've talked about before, and system breakdowns and failures because of cost cutting. And that affects people. And the people that we're concerned about are the folks here in North Carolina. So, you may have kids in a sport team, but, the all-star teams where you go out and you try to find the best players.
Sure.
All the teams, put them together, and that's what I've done. Stacy is a great trial lawyer, a lot of experience in medical negligence cases. We're going to meet someone else shortly, Gloria, that works with Stacy, who is a very experienced litigator. I wanted to put together the best team to make sure that we can offer folks out there the best help to look into these matters.
Stacy, I love your perspective on this because you grew up in a medical household. Your dad's a doctor.
Yeah, he was. He was my hero, and my hero was a doctor.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is an increase in hospital mistakes. And I think part of the problem is non-doctors are allowed to own medical practices in hospitals. Non-doctors are making decisions that affect health care. And doctors are not allowed to practice medicine the way they would like to. And these systems failures are resulting in medical mistakes at hospitals.
System failures, like I said at the opening, I mean, you go into the hospital, you have to have a procedure done, or God forbid, it's an emergency. You're expecting to come out of there okay, but you're not expecting some accountant to make a decision about your medication.
Well, that, or you're not expecting an accountant to make a decision to go and find the potential most inexperienced labor, the people that aren't qualified to be touching medications. You're not expecting them to try to look for cutting costs. And Drew, and if they're cutting costs, these hospitals are saving money, they're not giving it back to the patients.
Right.
This is money that they're taking as profits.
So when you think about this issue now, and you talked about the data from 2018, fast forward now to where we are now, through the pandemic, I would think that it might even be worse now.
It was, and the actual author of that study, was on one of the news programs just this past week, indicating that very fact, that he believed, not without data that he's seen, but he believed that these numbers were much worse because of the strain. Now, it was a strain that the hospitals were put under with the pandemic. Don't get me wrong about that. But with the lens of this corporate America of how we can save money and cut costs and cut corners, that ultimately is going to hurt our people here in North Carolina.
If you have a question, you can call the 800 number on your screen. You can also go to whitleylawfirm.com, and you can be anonymous if you'd like, but you can also email the Whitley Law Firm, and your questions will be answered that way. Stacy, what do you think is causing this? Is it simply a case of corporations worrying about their bottom line, so to speak, as opposed to what is the best health care we can give our patients?
That's a good question, and that's exactly what the problem is. Take, for instance, as with COVID now, you see more telemedicine. Well, there is no substitute for your doctor placing his or her hands on you and giving a thorough exam.
Right.
And so they're promoting, for the bottom line, telemedicine, which could be appropriate in some instances.
Right.
But often people go in for one problem and the doctor finds out they have a different problem.
Right.
Well, that's limited under telemedicine.
I had a telemed conference because I got COVID, and the doctor said, well, we don't want you coming to the office, but we'll do this telemed thing, and you tell me your symptoms, and I'll tell you what to do, which was take Tylenol and stay home, and that was about it. But I couldn't even imagine being in a situation where and we have such great health care in this state and great hospitals all across the state. I would hate to think that if someone is in there being treated, that you're not getting the best care possible because someone's worried about that medication costing too much.
We do. We have some of the best research universities,
Absolutely.
the best hospitals, but those resources are often clustered together, sometimes out of reach for people in the rural hospital settings. And so sometimes in these other hospitals, these hospitals that are far from the big trauma centers of Raleigh and Charlotte and Greensboro, they're out in the country, they're supporting other communities. Sometimes they're corporate owned. Sometimes these mistakes and these issues we see are coming out of those hospitals.
If someone's watching the program right now, and let's say they were hospitalized a month ago, we've got about a minute left in this segment. Let's say they were hospitalized recently, had an adverse situation arise, they're home now, they're recovering, but it was still fairly new. What should they do?
Well, I think the most important thing is have somebody advocate on your behalf. Have somebody champion your case, whether it's a friend or relative, to speak up for you.
Okay.
The squeakiest wheel gets the grease.
Yeah, right. Right.
And so I think that's one of the first things you should make sure you have with you when you go into the hospital, or because oftentimes you can't speak up yourself.
Yeah, right. And sometimes you're hearing a lot of medical jargon that's not registering. So if you have a spouse or a friend or just an acquaintance that could be with you, another set of ears.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And also, Drew, just remember you're always entitled to your medical records. You're always entitled to a copy of your medical records.
Right.
And if you found yourself in a situation where you think that there may be an adverse event, the very first thing to do, of course, once you're stabilized, is get a copy of your medical record.
You mentioned Gloria Becker. She's going to be joining us here momentarily, and we are watching Attorneys on Call. We'll be right back.